Right up there. Okay, so I'm going to move fast. And what I'm going to ask you to do is hold your questions until the end. We've got 5 different segments of this. And I want to get all of the content out first, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And hopefully we'll move fast enough so we've got a good time for discussion. Next. So what we're talking about today, we're going to quickly review the Liberating Structures process. Steve's going to talk about the Campus Planning Task Force, so kind of a summary of what's been going on. Then the Finance Committee and Council have a funding recommendation on the roof. The 4th item is a quick look at our amended Constitution, which is going to be up for final vote next Sunday. And then we have a proposed amendment to the bylaws, which enables some of our new structure stuff. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how the new structure gets implemented by the council through continuing resolutions. Next. So, the review of liberating structures. Some of you are new, so you haven't heard all this lingo about liberating structures. Very briefly, about 2.5 years ago, the Senate approached us and invited us to participate in an effort to help churches streamline their structures to respond to changing conditions. They called it Liberating Structures for Mission. It was led by the St. Paul Area Synod, and there were other churches involved. Next. The goals of this process of liberating structures. This is kind of lofty stuff. I'll let you just look at it. But basically, what we're doing is trying to take what was working and pack it into a new streamlined structure. Next. What we've done over the past 2.5 years, as you know, we've looked at our mission and vision and values. Now, the mission was there. We didn't really have to change it. Fundamentally, you boil it down, the short version is build a church and love the world. Then our vision, that was more of a process. We invited the congregation in a series of listening interviews and other exercises to help us sort out what you felt were the core values of this congregation. And we formed a group to help process that, and another small group to boil it down into a statement. And we got what I think is a terrific vision statement. The values we did before the vision statement, and we identified 5 core values for our congregation. And so far, they seem to work. When people talk about the values, they understand what we mean. It's something we can get our arms around. This morning, we're expressing the value of education. Then we amended our Constitution and our bylaws to eliminate the requirement that each of our 6 congregation life areas that we had in our old structure be represented on council by an elected person. Wasn't working. Couldn't get people to step up for a particular position. We allow those times so they went unfilled. And the whole goal of having them coordinate all the committees in that area and report back to council just wasn't happening. So we changed that by a bylaw amendment. And then we revised our Constitution to incorporate all those changes that the church has required us to make, and some additional ones that help us be more fast and flexible, primarily to reduce the size of the council and limit the at-large terms requirement to 1 year instead of 2, so that it's not as daunting for somebody to step up to a council position knowing they don't have to serve more than 1 year to satisfy the requirements. Next. So what's next? Next Sunday, we'll vote on the final draft of the Constitution. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Second, we're going to vote on a bylaw amendment to replace the 6 congregational life areas with 3. And then the next council will continue the work of revising our continuing resolutions to repackage the committee structures, the teams, and so forth that we've had up to date. Again, with an emphasis on let's keep it simple, let's do what works, let's not overcomplicate it, and make the best use of our resources. Next. Campus Planning Task Force. I'm going to turn it over to Steve at this point. You can run your own clicker, right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what the task force has done, but rather what the task force is proposing looking ahead. For our devotions this last week, I talked about the two books that Martin Luther King had in his duffel when he went to Memphis before he died, he was killed. And the one book was The Strength to Love. The second book was Where Do We Go From Here? And so I think the task force hopefully has kept in mind the strength to the love, or the goal of loving the world and loving our neighbor. And second, now we're kind of giving a few hints of where do we go from here, and hope the congregation will continue. As we look at all our projects, the city, at the urging of the DNR, has instituted new regulations regarding setbacks from lakes. Lake Bennett is different than Owasso. The setback restrictions are in effect for properties within 1,000 feet of the lake high water mark. We are within 1,000 feet of both Bennett and Owasso. Yeah. And so our entire campus is within the 1,000 feet. What that means is that there are restrictions. No building can be higher than 30 feet tall. And of course, our church exceeds that, but because it was already in place, we're okay with that. But nothing new could exceed 30 feet. And we cannot have impermeable surfaces, meaning building and parking, of more than 25% of the lot that's being considered. What this means for us, after we had done a lot of study about an affordable housing apartment and thought that may be a possibility on our property, means that that's really not an option at this point. If the developers looking at affordable housing indicated that they would require 35 to 50 units in order to be a viable project. 35 to 50 units, we understand, is about 11 to 13,000 square feet, 4 stories tall. Well, we can't put a 4-story building on. So if we divided that in half, our footprint would be at the 25% range. So that becomes a challenge. As we did spend a lot of time looking at housing. The tiny home settlements, we helped to meet state and city regulations, and we recommend that we be mindful on an ongoing basis to study and review how it's going and whether or not future expansion may be a possibility. So we're comfortable with the 3 homes at this point, and but believe that we need to be open to future. The affordable housing apartments, as we said, not really possible under the zoning regulations. By the way, the zoning regulations changed in March. And so we didn't even get notified as a church directly that it had been changed. So we continued going and planning, and then found out that, that we were affected by that. We looked at Emma's Place, which was a townhome development for homeless, and we did not have a developer, and we don't recommend a Section 8 HUD development with Prince of Peace managing it. So that was taken off the table. Habitat for Humanity deserves further study, and we may find this is an option for the future, that there could be some habitat development on our church campus. Other projects that were part of the process, solar. And you know that we passed a resolution to build a solar panel. That is on hold at this point because the developer that was going to do the solar had the proposal we were working with was that the developer would find an investor. Our investment would be nil upfront, but we would realize some benefit from it, that the investor would realize some benefit. But that did not require us to have the capital funds up front to invest in the solar. When we got the contract from them, after we approved it, they basically said, well, you're down the list a little bit for developers and we're having a lot of trouble finding, or not investors, and we're having a lot of trouble finding investors. My understanding is on the West Coast, the profit is greater. And so investors are migrating that way and not doing so much in the Midwest. And so it's on hold and needs further study to see if that's a possibility for us.
Sorry, we weren't sharing the slides with the Zoom before, and I apologize.
Okay. A second project that received a lot of attention was daycare. You know that when the Caterpillar daycare moved out, we lost the ability to have daycare without putting in a sprinkler system. Sprinkler system would require about 300 to 500,000 plus to install a sprinkler system. So that's kind of puts daycare at a tenuous spot. We also talked about daycare being attached to an affordable apartment, but with that off the table, again, daycare gets a hold. Sprinkler system. We have realized that fire marshals and legislation can change at any time, and we need to be mindful of a sprinkler system for contingency purposes, but we're not proposing that we take that step at this point. The architects that we worked with on the pro bono basis said that our building is safe. It's not that we're unsafe, but we can't do certain things like a daycare without that. Community garden. We recommend continuing community garden that we have and consider enhancement and potentially connected with some plots for the tiny home residents and that sort of thing. Gender neutral bathrooms. This proceeded from our vote to become a reconciled in Christ congregation, and the proposal being to have gender neutral bathrooms so that we don't have discrimination in any way, and proceed after further study to determine the best steps forward. Accessible parking. This is a priority from the group that we, and this would mainly be a process of getting new lines drawn. but to allow for van access and the larger space for wheelchair and that sort of thing to be able to function. Sanctuary accessibility. Thank you, Esther. And steps have been taken to add chairs with arms, and signage will help, and your cooperation on that. If you don't need a chair with arms, if you don't have to, it might be nice. Let those who may need it and need the extra boost use those. Renovations, repairs, and deferred maintenance. There's a list of things that needs to be done. And the list needs constant updating and ongoing attention in our mind. Food shelf clothing distribution, not a high priority. It would require good partners to work with. Outdoor worship with shade, convenient setup, and safety and accessibility. It should be continued on an occasional basis. Solar panels may make a difference with that if there's a feature for that. Sell the south lot. That's been something that was on the table. Selling the south lot would have been part of to a developer would have been part of an affordable housing process. But the question still remained, consider sale. The task force does believe that the zoning restrictions mean that property to the south is probably worth a lot less than our perceived value of it. The city or the county, as they look at the tax, rank it for tax purposes. They rate it at valued at $500,000 approximately. We do not believe we would get close to that because there are so many restrictions on a developer that would make it not financially viable. So I think we need to have an awareness of that, but at this point, we're not specifically recommending a sale. A lot of work is done, a lot remains to be done. The task force was set up for a period of the end of the year, and a time frame, I think a time limit does move people along. And so we moved along. We expect some continued consultation with the VKV architects on a pro bono basis, looking at what options may still remain. And a really huge thanks to all participants. We met every other week from April through this last Monday. Thanks to the congregation for your support, your questions, your input. I'd say a special thanks to Michael, who helped me with help get that pro bono charrette in place. Was a consultant as I drafted agendas and that sort of thing, and the communication with the council and congregation. And so thank you all, and thank you to the participants, and I guess questions will come later. Oh, there is also a written report back there that's our final report, and you can help yourself from the table there. The chamber. Yeah.
Okay. We get to move on, Michael?
Yeah.
All right, very good. So, just a quick step back, as you can see from the Constitution, the bylaws, the resolutions, the building projects, potential campus planning options. days, weeks, months, many meetings, a lot of efforts have gone into vetting this out. So I know we're moving through these slides really quick, but there's a whole lot of background behind setting these up. And that concludes here with, for me on the Finance Committee with the recommendation, the motion we're going to bring to the congregation at the semi-annual meeting next Sunday. And so that motion is to fund up to $250,000 from the Diesler estate to fund the outstanding parking lot and roof repair that have been now out there over a year. And the reason for that rationale is simply because that money continues to be sitting out there to be reconciled. And as you've heard so far in this presentation, we're kind of getting more focus on what's viable and what's not in terms of our options as a congregation. And so that allows us to focus a little more on, okay, we don't have a $400,000 immediate need right now. So it's a good time to make use of the funds and then set us up on a clean slate as we continue to vet the other options. Steve, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Just this illustrates what it means in terms of the funds. So today, as of the end of December, the Diesler fund was at $400,000. $15,500 is already restricted for the Enduring Gifts Endowment. We're only $4,000 away from concluding that. 4,000 more of giving in that will result in the remaining restricted funds being funded out of the Diesler. When that happens, what's actually available is 384,000. So the 250 is really affecting that. So if we move forward with this, 384,500 at the bottom of the slide here, you take away 240 remaining on the roof, 9,000 remaining on the parking lot. That will still leave us with 135,000 for future options. And so that is the gist of our recommendation.
Okay.
So those of you who were here last June when we voted on the first vote on the amended Constitution kind of got a rundown on what was in it. I'm not going to go over that all again. The next step was to submit it to the Synod, which reviewed it and made two changes. One, we used to have a clause that allowed up to 4 people to be given proxy voting privileges because they were doing childcare during the meeting. Not only do we not really use that anymore, but also the bishop said, no, can't do any proxy voting. So that's gone. Two, there's a new thing in here about how we do like Zoom meetings and things like that, all of our remote stuff. And the Synod and every other organization that deals with this has been struggling with how to do that. We drafted some language that we thought did a good job of it. The bishop wanted to insert some language that said that we had to offer the opportunity for simultaneous oral communication when we do a meeting remotely, which is fine. That's what we've been doing with our congregational meetings. We occasionally have used the council. We've used like a round robin email process to conduct votes. That's why we didn't have that simultaneous oral communication. And the language also says, or its equivalent in there. But we can live with that because it only applies to cases when there has to be discussion. We can still, if discussion has been completed, we can still have a round robin vote without discussion. So it's not going to impede our functioning. So those are two motions. Again, if you have questions about the not motions, amendments. If you have questions, hold them to the end. Now, this one is a little bit different. This goes to kind of our core structure, and we're proposing to through bylaws replace our 6 congregational life areas with 3 areas. I call them spheres of focus, and that's kind of awkward language in a way, but it's deliberately chosen to avoid other kinds of labels that have specific connotations that some people might. They aren't committees. Committee says some bad things to some people. They are not teams. Some people don't like the word teams. groups seems kind of important. So spheres of focus, we don't have to keep that language, and it's just, it allows you to kind of imagine what that means, and that's what we have to do, is imagine how these things are gonna work. So this is what the motion actually looks like. Now, you'll see some funny language here. You see that C 4.04 BL01. One of the frustrating factors in this whole constitution process is that we now have to number our bylaws and our continuing resolutions according to the numbering structure of the Constitution and embed those things in the draft of Constitution. So it's kind of very legalistic, but this is what you will see. So the Constitution, section 4.04, talks about the congregation needing to establish a structure. So that's the constitutional section that we're relating to. The bylaw we're recommending is that we create those three spheres of focus. So what are they? Internal engagement, building the church; external engagement, loving the world; and mission support. Each sphere of focus shall encompass the committees, teams, and work groups, there are those names again, whose work is largely related to that sphere of focus. Also, the work of each sphere of focus will be coordinated by leadership appointed by the Congregation Council. So that's the specific action that will be before you next Sunday. Next. We don't have to go into the old structure thing. I think I'm going to pause now and start opening it up for questions on any of these areas. And we'll just see where your interest lies.
This is the new structure.
Hey, Steve, you want to move it up one slide just so they can see? Yeah, there you go.
Well, that's a little bit simpler. Okay. Yeah.
Michael,
Yes.
just can you, I mean, maybe Kramer can't do it now, but I mean, who decides which present ministry group or committee, for lack of a better word, goes with each of these spheres?
Council. Yes, Karen.
So my mind functions on examples. So for instance, internal engagement, building the church, that might be things like worship, education.
Okay. I see where the question is going. So I've got a slide for that.
Okay.
Go forward.
There we go.
Okay, this is what the internal engagement looks like. Now, this is just the existing groups that were from our current continuing resolutions. And those green boxes under there are just a proposed imagining of what the substructures could be. Important to state, this is flexible. This could be one big internal engagement group, team, committee that just does all this stuff. Or it could be any combination of those groups below it. In discussions with, primarily with Peter, we kind of carved out these three areas, the faith life. And now we've kind of been doing it. This kind of captures what we've been doing. The big idea group has been doing a lot to help structure our faith life. It wasn't in our resolutions, but it's a group that works there. Now, we never had an active evangelism committee as such during the time I've been here. And some of these other things don't necessarily function as they're supposed to. But kind of the service and worship thing has been functioning informally, largely with the help of individuals who volunteer and are also volunteering for Big Idea and other things. So the point is that council can take a look at this along with staff and figure out which of these committees, teams, really function well, just leave them alone. But what we really want to do is have one leadership team or leader that looks at that whole area of internal engagement. Why? Well, let me give you an example. Every month at council, we get a report from Pastor Peter. It's a long report. It's detailed. He does a good job. But the personnel committee has been asking Peter to try to figure out where his focus should be, how he should streamline what he's doing. And so what he has done to help illustrate some of this is the last 2 or 3 months in his report, he highlights in blue a section that he says, I shouldn't have to write this. somebody else should do this reporting. Guess what? We want to create some entity, assign some responsibility to take that load off our pastor so that he does pastor stuff better. And we do lay stuff and coordinating among ourselves better. Next slide. External engagement. Again, here, we take the things that bring us out into the world. Now, the sacred settlement kind of straddles it. It's kind of internal and external, but for now, we'll say that is a world thing. Covenants, those would be all of our individual liaisons with various outside groups like the Synod. Now, in the past, we really haven't had any coordination on that stuff except through pastors. We may have had in the past, I'm not sure, but this way, that external engagement leadership team can take a look at all of this stuff and say, does this make sense? Is this where our priority is right now? Just as an example, Plymouth Youth Center. Apparently, we haven't had an active liaison to that organization for some time. It was significant to us, now it's not. Well, you know, somebody has to set priorities. Perhaps one year, because of the work that Luther Seminary is doing in continuing education, we really want to be supportive of Luther Seminary, so we make it a high priority. Other things fall down a little bit lower on the list. Who sets that priority? Well, council does, but the detailed work it takes to get the council to a point of making a decision shouldn't happen in a council meeting. Council doesn't get into the weeds. They talk about bigger strokes. So we need that leadership focus to help us figure that out. Community engagement, you can mix and match those boxes, but there's a lot of things we're doing and doing well. Again, we might not need 3 different groups under there, maybe just one external engagement team that meets quarterly and figures it all out and reports to the congregation council. Next slide. Ministry support. This one is where there's some really functional need right now. The administrative stuff, again, we're just kind of throwing nominating personnel, audit and so forth into, they all kind of function independently. They function directly with council. That's not something that really requires a lot of coordination, except that when it comes to how staff is deployed, it would be helpful to have some leadership, lay leadership, that would help figure out which of these activities has high priority and how we should support them with lay volunteers and get some of the load off our staff. But let's focus on building and grounds, because that you just heard the campus planning task force report. Through the process of the campus planning task force, well, let's go to the next couple of slides here. I want to show you something. Next one. There. When we formed the campus planning task force, we essentially did something that this new sphere of focus leadership would do, which is to say, we've got this big problem. Which of our groups or teams need to be involved in working on this problem? So we said, well, it's going to be the finance committee because there's big money implications. It's going to be the property committee because that's kind of, boilerplate. That's where we are. Property is supposed to do all that. And then we've got affordable housing team, which is never in our continuing resolutions, but which has been doing much of the significant work we had to look back at and continue. Sacred settlement is impacted, and of course the council. So that was how a kind of a coalition of groups, a matrix kind of organization, if you want to use some fancy business lingo, was used to bring people together. Okay, go back up to one more. Yeah. Now, one of the problems that campus planning had all the way through it is we kept saying, well, what about the current building? What about the current building? What's going on here? Well, many of you know that council approved a set of projects some time ago. Actually, they approved a plan, rooted and reaching. How far back does that go?
Before me.
What?
Before me, I've been here 8 years.
Yeah, before, okay. So guess what? We still have a fund account that has a balance in it from that effort. And projects that were identified that didn't get funded.
Oh.
Why the heck not?
Ah.
Well, because we did not have a functional structure to deal with that. Which is not the fault of people on property committee. They just didn't have the structure or the, you know, the council leadership to be able to function in that way. We've got an air conditioner sitting on top of the narthex that isn't connected. He's approved it 2 years ago, still not connected. We're gonna do drainage up the side of the building, approved that, still not done. We got a non-functional air conditioner in the kitchen.
Oh.
Got hooked up, never worked, right? Still not working. You know, so we haven't done a good job of that. Now, a bigger church would hire a facilities administrator who would bring plans to council, and all that stuff would get done. We don't have that. So how do we get that done? Well, two things. One, I'm suggesting we need a separate group which involves the maintenance issues. And by that, I mean the ongoing stuff like that the Monday morning crew does and that other people do around here, just taking care of the plants, the garden, the lawns, and the miscellaneous repairs that need to be done. But then also to manage and oversee the essentially the planned repair and replace projects, such as fixing that air conditioner and other things that have been approved or that are not long-term capital investments. In other words, we can fund them out of the resources we've set aside. We just need to manage the project and get it done. The other piece we need is to continue campus development. So we need to have something that takes all those recommendations that the Campus Planning Task Force came up with and continue it. That could be something very much like the Campus Planning Task Force. But we want the council to think that through and to hear from people that need to be involved in it to make those recommendations and see how that gets structured. So bottom line is, we still have the existing committee structure, both functioning and not functioning. We need to transform it into something that we can plan with and report with based on those three areas. What's happening inside that's building our church, what's happening with our outside neighbors that's loving the world, and then what are the nuts and bolts that are keeping us going. Scott.
Was that the blue box, was that mission support on an earlier slide? Is it mission or ministry support?
You're right, he caught that.
Oh,
we want to use this phrase, ministry support.
Okay.
Too many people, when they hear, it's not a bad thing. When they hear mission, they think, you know, whole mission, you know, that kind of stuff. And
That's
so
bad attitude.
and, yeah, and so I've been trying to get Michael to be consistent, but ministry support is what you want to call that.
Well, consistency is the hobgoblin. Or consistency, not consistency.
Ministry means.
Are you calling me a
people
goblin?
Think of us, the organization. You can even say organizational support, right?
Okay. Yeah,
It's a church, good church.
yeah, there are little nuances in language and so forth that we can work out as we go along, as long as we get a sense of what we're talking about. Again, this is not to create a whole new set of boxes to force people into, is to try to create some boundaries and add some resources to the existing things that are working and then build on. Do you have any questions about the Dietzler Fund proposal, to fund the roof? Yes.
What needs to be done on the roof? What needs to be done to complete it or finish it or
Pay it
fix?
off.
The only thing that needs to be done, as I understand it, is a safety railing,
Okay.
which is, I won't say it's exactly optional, it's a code requirement, but we haven't been cited on it, and it's not a immediate, it's not a high priority. Yes.
Do you have monies estimated for those two projects, the roof and the balance to be paid on the parking lot?
That's already been spent, that's it.
But the 250 out of Rose Dietzler is to cover those two projects, right?
Right.
We're paying ourselves back. We basically loaned ourselves and sitting in a negative position on the.
Right, there are no, at this point, no outstanding obligations on those two projects.
We've borrowed the money from Rose Dietzler, this makes it official.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Those are borrowed.
this time last year, we were at about 275. Now we're down to, 250. So people have been contributing to it over time. We just did that.
Now, the reason that it's taken this long to make that decision is that when we looked at doing something, for example, a big apartment complex, we thought that might take a couple of $100,000 of our money. We also anticipated that we needed a capital campaign. You know, there was an argument early on about the roof. It should be funded out of these or have a capital campaign. This resolves that question. There's no capital campaign going to be held for the roof. We had a capital campaign for the parking lot, still a few bucks short, so we're funding it and just getting it off the books. But as you can see, when Arjun talked about and Steve talked about sprinkler system here, for example, there are a lot of contingencies out there that could cause us to have to come up with more money, or we could choose to do something major in terms of renovating this building, adding to our sacred settlement and so forth, at which point we'd have to evaluate, can we do a capital campaign and for how much? So we're just deferring that question until we know exactly what that's going to take and how we would go about it. Other questions? Gary.
I noticed under the three larger areas, spheres of focus, as you call it, that there's still, I mean, lots of teams or committees listed.
Right.
Now, some of them probably are dormant, and some of them are probably one or two people.
Right.
But how will some of them go away, you think, or combine with other committees or teams?
Well, I'm passing the football.
Yeah.
That goes to council. Next council. Yeah, some of them will go away, I'm sure.
I mean, it seems like a lot of teams for a congregation our size. That's what I'm getting at.
Exactly. That's the whole point of this. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll defer to.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I think, you know, what this shows is this is kind of trying to map what's kind of currently out there in the ether, some which are dormant, some which are very active, to try to get a perspective of here's where these things might fit. But the work of the new work of the council is then going to be reconciling that, you know, like as Michael said, you know, we probably need, one of the things that's not on here is like a major project planning committee that could go under campus planning. It might not, but this then provides the structure, and right. I would anticipate a bunch of those boxes may go away.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that the new structure provides is agility. And that was my comment in council. Because what it allows us to do is be able to react to any opportunity or barrier that prevents us from moving forward in loving the world. And it also allows us to do things on much more of an ad hoc basis, but with formal council support because of those structures, which is a little different than what we've had. You know, we've always had ad hoc, but this allows council to be aware of it and also to have some of the formal touch base. Yeah. And that's good news for everybody. You know, I don't know about anybody else, but I've been in groups where it's like, you know, I don't know how we get to X. I don't know where we go for Y. This will provide a pathway as well.
Yes, to add on to that, one of the draft continuing resolution items that I had considered and that I'll give to council to consider is just formalizing the process and say, okay, if any two congregation members have an idea for something they want to do, hey, just bring it to the leadership of one of these three focus areas, and you can do it. You might not get the resources because we have to see what we got, but that way it's known to the people that communicate with council, and it's supported by council. And the purpose of that is we want to make sure it's congruent with our mission, vision. We want to be moving in the same direction on a lot of things.
How are these groups communicated to the congregation? I know coming back, I see lots of things happening. I don't know who to go to ask or to say, I'd like to do that. Other than to come into the office and say and get information.
Well, that'll be the communication job of the, let's go back a couple of slides. Let me show you kind of how the responsibilities lay out here. Next one. No, back down, down again, I guess. Keep going. I think it's at the end of these big graphics here. There we go. The leadership of each of these three, here are their responsibilities. And this is something that would be incorporated into continuing resolutions if the council likes it. So it's to coordinate the activities of the teams, to report to the congregation council on the activities of the teams, to coordinate planning that sets the goals, budget requirements, and outcomes, and to request council action as needed to facilitate that work. Now, I would say on the report to congregation council, that also could include report to congregation. The manner and method and so forth needs to be determined. But again, hey, you know, there was a time when anybody who wanted to do any service and worship just knew to catch Judy Florine after the service. Or Judy Florine would catch you. You know, and that's what we'd like to get to. Now I know that some of the comments I've gotten on this are that, yeah, well, this all looks good, but it still requires leadership, and where are they? You know, well, let me tell you something. We met as a campus planning task force from May until December, till January. I don't know how many meetings, but it was every other week. 15 members or so on the task force, about 95% attendance. That's unheard of in my experience in any organization, let alone a church. Why? Because it was mission centered, it was vital, it was important, and we knew we had obligations to the world and things we needed to do.
A time frame.
And a time frame, and clear goals, clear outcomes. Do that. And another thing I've been trying to say for quite a long time, give people a chance to do what they are gifted to do, and you'll preserve their energy. If you feel gifted to join in and sing in the choir, you like it. You know, if you feel gifted to sit down with a bunch of people and draft a vision statement, which one of us is, you know, it's not a big challenge. It energizes you to do these kinds of things. So again, this gives us more opportunity to capture that stuff. I'm not saying it's going to succeed entirely because all of us are busy. A lot of us are tired. So, and then the authorities. The authorities of leadership is to bring people together and to authorize spending or delegate it to a smaller group. Yes.
Roger had a question.
Oh, Roger.
Yeah.
So what will we be voting on next Sunday?
You'll be voting on the three focus areas.
Okay. And what about the dieseler thing?
Yes, you'll be voting on the diesel.
Also, okay.
Yeah. And the final draft of the Constitution.
Okay.
Yes.
To refresh my memory, how many council people do we have? And that will be up for election too, won't it?
Yes. Now, I am forbidden by the Constitution from participating in the nominating process, so you'll have to talk to Pastor Peter or somebody else about the slate. But yeah, we'll be voting on new council people.
But when you say council does all this, how many people are council?
If the Constitution is adopted, it's between 6 and 9.
And they are people from these new areas, the three?
No. Council is.
Anyway, I don't know if it's time now, but that would need to be explained for me next Sunday too a little bit. I mean, on the 20th.
Okay.
The congregation elects 4 officers of the congregation and that serve on the council.
Yeah.
And then another, I think the nominating committee is prepared to bring back forward 5 names. 3 of them are actually continuing a 2-year term. They were elected a year ago for a 2-year term. And then two new people joining the council. We're at 5. I think there's the committee's still looking for a 6th. So
we're trying to enlarge.
Ultimately, there would be 10 lay people on the council. Plus, our Constitution says any of our roster leaders serve on the council and have a vote on the council. I'm currently the only roster leader, so yeah, I'm a part of the council. So that actually makes it 11. Yeah.
Well, we have to talk about that because the Constitution sets it a number. So if adopted,
Yeah.
we'll talk about it.
Okay,
So maybe part of the question is how do the people who are elected or who are currently on the council relate to the three areas?
That is a council decision. Council appoints the leader. The original draft said leader, but then it was suggested in council that we might want to have a couple of people as a team leaders. So the council can appoint council members, so it could still be, for example, the council could appoint the vice president to lead the ministry support team area. Focus. But they don't have to. But the council will appoint those leaders, and the council will establish what the communication expectations are.
So the council could appoint somebody like another lay leader, so.
Yes.
You might
they
have
don't
somebody.
have to be elected by the congregation to serve in that role, but they could be in the sense of being elected to the council.
That person has to agree.
Yeah.
Again, that's flexibility. In the past, each of those 6 areas needed to be elected by the congregation.
You've all been a part of conversations where somebody said, well, I would do that, but I don't want to be on the council. Right?
Right.
I don't want to have to go to that monthly meeting or, whatever.
Yeah.
And, or there are people who are like, I'd like to be on the council, but don't make me also be the chairperson of a stewardship committee. Don't also make me be in charge of property, right? And so this is a way of one of the hopes here is that it really frees people up to be more specific about lining their gifts and their passions to the work that they're being called to do and not being asked to carry what they would see as a burden of some other responsibility because the Constitution requires.
This might not be the time for it, but I would like to thank you, Michael,
Yeah.
for all the work you've done, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. it's been,
Yeah.
And sharing your expertise and your love for the church and God's mission.
You're here.
I'll never make you sit through another decision factor analysis.
Trouble with that.
We all did.
On the other hand, we got where we got, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh. Time. We're done.
You're free.
Good job.
How did it feel?
It's in between 2 days.